Hello YouTubers, Chilios2222 here. Good morning. Should you carry the Sig P320 pistol report? I'll leave that up to you. Recently I found this little article at cjtc.wa.gov and I'll just go over it briefly. It's only 10 pages, which is nice. It's their Training Commission, Criminal Justice Training Commission of Washington State. Take this for what you will. I found some interesting points in it, and I guess as another gentleman used to say, you be the judge. So you have the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, the problem, terminology and definitions, which is interesting. The work group, I'm not going to go over all that, but I'll go after the critical findings. So this is a little bit about Washington State Criminal Justice Training. It gives you the background, the problem that they had. So that little blurb, they experienced a critical safety issue with a Sig P320 during fall 2024 BLEA training. There's an abundance of information. It says not all credible, so just bear that in mind. Circulating through the public sphere regarding safety issues with the 320. I guess if you're in the firearms world, you kind of know that there's a lot that's going on. So they're acknowledging that. Their terms, which I found kind of interesting, are unintentional discharge and uncommanded discharge, and they define those. Unintentional discharge, negligent, accidental. So you'll hear all that referred to out in the firearms world. That's a firearm being discharged accidentally. Thanks for that. Thanks for using the term twice, right? Typically due to unsafe handling or failure to follow proper safety measures and protocols. All right, that's kind of useful. So basically you make a mistake in handling the firearm, or you don't pay attention to safety. Firing the gun, I hate that term. It's a weapon, without the shooter intending for it to happen, often resulting from a failure to maintain control, poor judgment, yeah, I'll give it that, or unsafe handling practices. While the terms are sometimes used interchangeably, each implies a failure to follow safety rules. So they're separating this. Basically, this is not what the SIG is involved with. It's not you not following a safety rule, although it could be. They're referring to an uncommanded discharge, and that refers to the unintended firing of a firearm without explicit actuation of the trigger. I think they could have just said actuation of the trigger. So in other words, if you're not pulling the trigger or going anywhere near the trigger of the firearm, safety rule number 1 comes into play, which is never point the firearm at anything you don't intend to destroy. So that covers what we're talking about here. There's a work group with a whole bunch of names listed, and out of respect, I'm not going to go over individuals' names. Also, if anyone's watching this, they need me to take down this video, I'll gladly take it down, but this was in public. I could get it online, so it was in public view. On October 9th, 2024, their class number 901, participating in a firearm shooting drill at the Northeast Regional Academy, Spokane Police Shooting Range. As the recruit drew their firearm Sig 320 to engage the course of fire of their gun, immediately self-discharged, more commonly or accurately referred to as what they said, an uncommanded discharge. So in other words, they did not pull the trigger, or so they say. The bullet from the recruit Sig 320 struck behind the firearm shooting drill group. That had to be an interesting moment in their training at the academy. I guess they were in the concrete grounds. Bullet fragments struck an instructor and another recruit in their lower extremities. I assume that's their legs, as they were standing behind the recruit. So that was a wake-up call. All firing was ceased. Good idea. So if there's ever an incident, you want to cease fire immediately. So they got that accomplished. They checked for injuries. Good idea. Probably everyone should have locked and cleared their weapons as well on the firing range, or just set their weapons down and kept them pointed down range. The recruit reported as they drew their gun, firearm, right? I was indexed and the back plate of the slide on my Sig 320 bumped into my vest, self-discharging. So the recruit drew their firearm, somehow bumped into their vest, which I think that should probably be a training issue, but that can happen if you're wearing body armor, which was supported. I'm not going to blame the recruit for doing that. That's something obviously that can happen, which was supported by the firearms instructor who was standing behind the recruit. So they're saying the Sig 320 bumped into his vest, self-discharging, which was supported by the firearms instructor who was standing behind the recruit. So the instructor apparently was behind the recruit, I guess providing support and overwatching the recruit doing the training. That's what I'm gathering from this. The firearm instructor's summary states, yeah, I'm sorry, some of these are like lengthy, these reports, and you have to kind of be there to see exactly what happened, but they're trying to do it. The firearm instructor's summary states that they observed the recruit during the course of fire, and upon the command to fire, the recruit's weapon immediately fired while he was drawing the weapon. The firearms instructor also stated they immediately looked at the recruit's trigger finger. It was not on the trigger or in the trigger guard. That's the common check that you do, is the trigger finger outside the guard. The firearms range staff inspected both the recruit's gun and holster and then directed the recruit to conduct several additional draws of their gun to include firing. Although no additional issues were detected, the recruit was prohibited from using their Sig 320 in firearms training. All right, so that was their incident that they're focusing on. And then they're taking the firearm out of service. So they're notifying you on October 17th, 2024. They sent out a notice to stakeholders that summarized the shooting incident, which we just went over. And they temporarily prohibited the use of the 320 on those properties. So they don't want this firearm on their properties. This event, I guess, is what made up their mind, and they're not going to have the 320 there for training because it's a liability. So after this event, now they're looking at all these other incidents out there, which they should be, and what they're reviewing, they give you a list. So they list the Sig 2.3 million lawsuit and judgment. They list a Montville Police Department incident. They list a Milwaukee Police Department incident, the Connorsville, Indiana Police Chief incident, and then they go over the history of the Sig. So they go into the drop safe upgrade of 2017. So initially the 320s, I guess, had a drop issue, and I think everyone kind of knows about that drop issue, and they underwent an upgrade. that wasn't a good look for them from the onstart, from the get-go. 5-step process to fire the 320. That's the internal parts, I believe, of the 320. And then they went over factors, and you can read all this on your own. So you can go over this and you can get an idea of their investigative process and why they're stating, I think they're stating that, because of what happened with the recruit, they don't want the liability. But in their report, it's nice because they actually go over all these other reports or all these other indications that there may be a problem with the handgun. So again, you be the judge, you make up your mind. I found this interesting, the factors. Foreign object contacts the trigger where the foreign object is no longer present following the discharge. So you had something in the holster and then the firearm discharged, and then that object is either got out of there or whatever was in the holster is not there anymore. Jarring or bumping the firearm, that was the case with this recruit. He bumped the back of the firearm, basically the rear of the pistol, and then the pistol fired, or so they say. Holster with wide apertures that don't fully protect the trigger area. So I think that's saying something can get into the trigger area, or there's access to the trigger inside the holster. And that's just not a good fit with your holster. That's something you want to pay attention to with any firearm. Wrong, modified, or damaged holster. That could happen. You pick the wrong holster and game over for you, I guess. And they always tell you don't modify your holster. That could be bad. These are all good points. Unnecessarily handling equipment. So that just means you're constantly holstering and unholstering your pistol, which you shouldn't do for no reason unless you're training, which they were doing. Lack of familiarity with the fire mechanism or safety components in a particular firearm, or transporting the firearm in an unconventional manner. Not really sure what those examples would be. So then they just went over the design of the Sig. So this was a big thing with Sig countering all the claims. Sig basically states the 320 can only fire if the trigger's been depressed. And they talk about these 5 independent actions, which is the machinery inside the handgun. So Sig is saying these 5 things need to occur. And obviously it seems like they are occurring. And that's why the firearm is firing. So you can look at that, but if you don't have a good knowledge of the inside parts, that's your primary striker sear, secondary sear notch, and safety lock. All those things work together inside the handgun. And some more points that I found interesting. We're getting to the end here. Thanks for bearing with me. I know this stuff is stupid, right? But there was one on the military which I found interesting. Sorry for scrolling on you, but it's a lot of mess here. They said additionally 6 military installation uncommanded discharges involving Sig 320, M17, and M18. So I don't know if the military calls it a 320. I think I know that they call it an M17 and an M18 on the different sizes. The most significant event was documented at an Okinawa military base because of their impeccable maintenance and training records. In addition, the clear and convincing video capturing the event, only mentioned in the final report, which absolved the security guard of negligence. So, security guard in Okinawa, I don't know if they're typically called security guards, unless they're outside agencies that they employ. I know Air Force has security forces, if that's who it is. but it would have been a soldier or Marine, I guess. Included in support of the temporary prohibition is the Department of Defense Fiscal Year 17 Annual Report, which outlines the results of their drop testing the 17 and 18. So that was something that was early on. But what they're saying, importantly, is 6 military installation uncommanded discharges. So that's the part that I found interesting. So in this report, you can go down to their critical findings, in which they find that there's plenty of information on the 320. And they say they have a consensus for or against a prohibition. And to me, it looks like basically they decided to prohibit it. So that's their decision. They went through all this data. They have an appendix here recording the lawsuit, Montville PD findings, Milwaukee officer, and then they have the incidents down here. I guess, I don't know if you can click on these and go into these incidents, but we'll go back to the beginning of the report so you have it. And again, this was the cjtc.wa.gov. And I just searched for these reports online. I'm starting to dig more into them to see what I can find it's interesting. This is the Sig 320 pistol report, February of 25. So this is, it's not too long ago. And it's the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. Chilios 2222, please like and subscribe. Be careful out there, and be careful with your SIG, and let us know your reports.